Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is our International Development Week event on reflections on trust, risk, and due diligence. My name is Meg French, and I'm the Executive Director of the Stephen Lewis Foundation, and I'm really pleased to be here with all of you today. I'd love to get your perspective on why you think that this is an important conversation to have, this is a conversation about risk and trust during International Development Week.
It's the message that makes up the entire foundation of the aid system, and a message that's deeply rooted in colonialism and in imperialism, that local people, communities in the global south, local organizations that are made up of staff from these communities don't have the answers. They don't have the capacity, and even if they did, we can't trust them anyway because they don't know what they're doing. We really try to put communities' voices at the forefront and try to challenge these myths around capacity and really recognize that decades of top-down colonial approach to aid has caused serious dependencies. As a sector, what we really need to kind of ask ourselves is, we've been doing the same thing for decades with little to no sustainable outcome, and communities oftentimes are still in the same, if not worse, position. So we need to ask ourselves, what do we have to lose by putting trust in these communities to develop the solutions that we know will work? So I think the real risk we need to think about is the accountability to our communities and the risk of not recognizing their agency.
The reason we've got organizations like TAC, it is for them to respond to the challenges and the needs of the people at community level. And as such, most of the times, what we want to achieve on the ground is not what the donor wants to fund. And as the result of that, as organization now, we end up finding ourselves having to shift the goalpost and try to meet the needs of the donors. It therefore means the organization lose touch with the realities that are happening on the ground.
Our financial management systems are set in such a way that we allow for flexibility within the partner, because we all understand that partners across the world, community-led organizations across the world are dealing with complex problems that do not have linear solutions. So it is important for us to allow them to be able to adapt. If you put metrics in place that does not allow a community-based organization to adapt when it is needed, you're actually going to impact negatively, on their impact as a whole.
From the inception of AWDF, we have complemented our grant making with capacity building and leadership and coaching programs. When it comes to how we do our due diligence processes, it's really not to eliminate organizations. No, our intention is to really understand where the organizations are in terms of some of the existing gaps that may impact on the ability of the organizations to achieve their objectives. Really, the intention is to know where the organizations are and then offer the needed capacity building supports to those organizations.
A lot of us are thinking about risk all wrong by not funding proximately and funding flexibly. There's a real risk on actual human lives. Many times the biggest obstacle to direct funding for civil society organizations in the Global South is that perceived risk associated particularly with their compliance and control systems. But because they lack the access to that unrestricted funding, it hampers their ability to actually develop these systems that will allow them to align with these donor requirements.
When you create very big, monitoring and evaluation structures, that puts a burden on the partner to fulfill. At times, it causes a lot of waste because they want to fulfill your requirements. The funds that are supposed to be focused on implementing the project and causing the changes in lives, of the people in the community is spent to fulfill, these requirements.
If we continue to see organizations as projects, that come and go, rather than, institutions that are constantly working to change the status quo, then we are also not going to be given the realistic resources that they really need to be resilient and sustain themselves. And that is why for all of us, we agree that really the best kind of investments is unrestricted funding. Where the organizations really have the flexibility and unrestricted in terms of the timeline and all those other things. They have the flexibility to take advantage of the important things that they need to deal with at any moment in time.
Donors must trust civil society organizations and CBOs based on the work they are doing on the ground, as well as based on the processes of compliance that they have followed. That will also mean, as organizations, we must be in a position to build those relations with donors and not treat donors as our bosses, but we treat the donors as partners. And when we treat them as partners, we will be able to have both formal and informal conversations about how it is a need for them to understand the work we are doing and how best they can be able to apply flexibilities on their side in order for our organizations to be able to benefit. But also, it is important to note that first step of decolonization, it must start by building the capacity of ordinary citizens and communities in order for them to be empowered to take up on campaigns and issues that affect people on the ground and be in a position to challenge the entire system.
We are working for a collective change. So it's more about just making sure that all the organizations who are doing fantastic work, to transform their communities are getting the resources that they need to be able to do that. And that requires that collectively, when we have the opportunity, we all use our voices to ensure that they are receiving the right kind of funding.
I think hearing these kinds of conversations and reflecting on what it means for us as individuals and as organizations, wherever we sit in the donor international development world, we all have a role to play. And I think the most important piece is the action that comes out of those reflections and those conversations. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for being here today. We really appreciate it.